We hear a lot in the Austin area about mainline religions, mainline groups, but we might not know that there are all kinds of other movements, ferments, interesting things going on. Today we talk to two women involved in the women's spirituality movement on Austin Faith Dialogue. Stay with us.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
It's good to have you here for today's show on Austin Faith Dialogue when we talk about women's spirituality. I'm Sandy Wilder, your host, with two guests. First, Mara Lee and Bridget Kelly. Good to have both of you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Now, how would you, so we can set the stage here, how would you define women's spirituality so that folks begin to understand how it's perhaps the same and perhaps different from other ways of expressing faith?
I would say that women's spirituality could be defined many ways. I mean, it could be each individual woman's spirituality. The fact that you are a woman, whatever spirituality you have, is women's spirituality. I'd say that the movement of women's spirituality is moving toward viewing the divine as a female for some members of the women's spirituality movement. It's moving toward expressing your worship, whatever it is, in a more feminine way, taking your spirituality internally. It's moving away from having your dialogue with the divine being interceded by a priest or a reverend or a minister, having that dialogue with the divine yourself. I'd say that that's one of the things that makes women's spirituality different, the fact that we don't really have leaders, we don't really feel that we need to have someone intercede with us, with the divine.
Okay, and Mara, you have said that you had a more traditional upbringing. So
yeah.
what
Most of the women have.
What has it been about your particular life experience that has caused the women's spirituality movement to be particularly attractive to you?
I like the energy that's involved. There's something definitely different about women-only energy, because most of the events that I go to are women-only. And there's just something different and powerful about having women's energy without involving male energy. It's also more reverent of the earth itself, whereas the Christian background I had was, looking forward to dying and going to heaven. This is like about living well here on earth and taking care of it so that there's something left for the future.
That is a whole different approach. For some historical background, I think you, Bridget, have done some reading in particular, at least pulling some facts together. What can you tell us about the history of women's spirituality? Because obviously women have had spiritual lives for millennia. But as a movement, how did women's spirituality get started?
Well, I would basically say that women's spirituality, it begins at the beginning. I mean, the first images of the divine are female. The Venus of Willendorf, anyone who's studied art history knows that that's the first art. You open a art history book, it's the image of the female divinity. When they find images of the divine around the world, the farther back you go in time, eventually all the images of the divine are female. So it's believed that women were first, that the divine was first viewed as female. About 6,000 years ago, when the Judeo-Christian concept sort of caught on and took over, the view of the female divinity was degraded, and it was sort of a conscious effort. And as we all know, this went on for a long time. There's a lot of historical evidence, that as the Catholic Church was going through Europe and trying to bring the church, what they called the pagans, which that word really means country dweller, into the Catholic Church's fold, that they couldn't stop the people from worshiping the goddess. And St. Patrick, it is said, actually went to the Pope in Rome and told him, these people will not give up their goddess. You have to give Mary a bigger place in the church. And that was a conscious effort of the Catholic Church. And that what you'll find is that a lot of the cathedrals that were built to Mary were actually built on ancient sites where the goddess was worshipped. In modern times, I would say that the beginning of the modern women's spirituality movement probably began with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who worked for her whole, well, I guess from the time she was about 35 until her death. She worked for the right for women to vote and started many organizations. And finally, when she was 80 years old, she had this insight that that the problem was not politics, that the problem was religion, that religion is something that pervades our society, and that little girls were taught from the beginning that God is man. Part of what gave her this insight was that at that time there were some anthropological studies done and there were some digs done, and they actually found some matriarchal evidence of matriarchal societies. So that was like the first time in modern times that people started realizing that people had worshipped the female as the divine. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was pretty much disavowed by the very organizations that she had started. They thought she was radical, of course. So basically, what I had been telling you earlier, what happened was that with the women's movement, as women became very political and became very feminist and started looking to do everything on a female level. I mean, it's like you wanted to support female businesses, you wanted to support female politicians, you wanted to have a female doctor. And a lot of those women, because they were political and they felt that religion was really demeaning and degrading and hadn't been spiritual or religious for a long time, when they started doing their historical research into the women's movement and the women of history, when they got into Elizabeth Cady Stanton, there was like, oh, God as a woman. That's an interesting concept. And sort of what was going on at the same time is, and I sort of take this out of the 60s kind of thing. I mean, the women's movement sort of came out of the anti-war movement. At the same time, we all know there's this sort of spiritual awakening going on in America where people were studying non-traditional religions, a lot of Eastern philosophies, Eastern religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, a lot of people interested in things like that, but a lot of those religions didn't quite fit women either. And so when those women would start researching into their religion and then somewhere down the line, like maybe in Hinduism, get into a goddess, then suddenly that was a big insight. And what happened to a lot of women, a lot of political women who hadn't been spiritual for a long time, they would come to this concept of the goddess and suddenly they would become spiritual. A lot of spiritual women who hadn't been political, they would come to the concept of the goddess, and that would make them a feminist, that would make them political. So it really, there's like this merging of women in our movement, that some of them came from a spiritual background, some of them came from a political background, and you come to the goddess and it just fits. It feels good. It empowers you. It empowers you politically and gives you strength to be an activist, to do the work that you're doing. As a spiritual woman, it empowers you to take that spirituality out into the world and do the work that needs to be done. So
a coming together of many things in U.S. history. Now, you've talked a few times here about the goddess, and I can conjure up a mental image of God, which, yes, is male, long flowing beard and all. When people talk about a goddess, Mara, what kind of image might come to their mind? Is there sort of a way that word is forming?
Goddess is often threefold: the maiden, the young, lithe, happy-go-lucky, the nymph in the woods kind of image, the mother, the nurturing one who takes care of those around her, especially the children, and probably the plants and everything that go along with the earth. And then the crone, the elder mother, the older woman who has a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge, and that we turn to in combination for comfort as well. And also as a transition from life to death to the beginning of the next cycle. Some people also consider a fourfold goddess, that there's a stage in between the young maiden and the mother that one of my friends is really serious about the, what does she call it, the holy harlot? That stage of life when you're really excited about exploring the pleasures of life.
Right. Now, in traditional religions, there's a notion that God is the creator of everything, not just that God is a presence experienced in many different ways, but that what was caused by God. In women's spirituality, does that concept translate into the goddess also?
The goddess started it all. She danced and brought life out from what was it, Erebus, the egg, the snake, and he claimed that he had done it all, and she stepped on his head.
There are a lot of creation myths we need to read then.
Yeah, oh, there are, and that was one of the reasons that I kind of got away from the Christianity, was because I realized that a lot of the story had come in some ways from mythology. When I started reading mythology, there's Isis and Osiris, and Osiris is dead for 3 days, and she puts him back together, and everything's okay again. So, where did it all start? I don't know.
We've made up many stories, we humans, to explain why we're here. I get a sense then that women's spirituality really is not a monolithic something, but really is a movement then. Would that be a correct way to describe it, sort of an umbrella for people coming to spirituality from a number of perspectives?
I'd say coming from a number of perspectives and having their spirituality in a number of perspectives. There's, when you do the historical research, there's goddesses all over the world. I mean, there was just a woman who did a seminar here on African Yoruba goddesses. I'm Irish. I've done a lot of research into the Celtic goddesses. I mean, there's Kuan Yin in China. The Japanese royal family say they're descended from the sun divinity. That sun divinity is a female. It's Amaterasu is who they're descended from. They're descended from a goddess. In India, I mean, that's one of the last places on earth where people seriously still worship goddesses. There's Kali, there's, Parvati,
Saraswati.
Shakti, and the goddess has a very special place there. So, in North America, there's Changing Woman, there's Spider Woman, the Native Americans worship the goddess. In Mexico.
Well, how about we talk about some of those manifestations and some other parts of the movement when we come back for the second half. Stay with us for the rest of Austin Faith Dialogue. We're back for the second half of Austin Faith Dialogue, talking about women's spirituality today with two guests, Bridget Kelly and Mara Lee. Good to have both of you. And as we talked in the first half about women's spirituality, primarily its history in the United States, I wonder how the movement has grown, gotten started internationally. I think, Mary, you can say a little bit about that.
Well, what I know about is the work that the Foundation for Compassionate Society has been involved with. Genevieve Vaughn has been doing work for many years with Indigenous women all over the world, providing whatever is necessary to get them involved in entrepreneurship, radio, so that they can hear what's going on in other places. Sent many women to the Women's Conference in Beijing, was it? Mm-hmm. China. And did reports on that. She did the feminist family values when there was that big family values thing we were talking about. That means man, woman, and children. And we're going, no, you're ignoring what the women want as values. And that was a really interesting conference. She's helping a lot of women in the central Texas area also to discover goddess. She's got the Stonehaven Goddess program going on, where there are various women who come out and give weekend presentations on a variety of subjects. We just had one on the Yoruba and dreaming a couple of weekends ago.
Stuff.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, and perhaps some of the people watching are also wondering, since you both are involved in the women's spirituality movement, what that looks like in your daily lives. We may understand, say, daily prayers, a weekly worship service, service to the community, those kinds of things. But as someone involved in women's spirituality, Bridget, how does that translate into your daily life?
In my daily life, I would say that since I've become aware of the goddess, taken her on as my divinity, it's all encompassing. I mean, as Mara had said before, you know, this is an earth-loving, earth-respecting religion. I mean, it's very conscious of, you have to think of everything that you're doing. You have to, you know, like, everything you're doing has to be honoring and respecting the people, the planet, the plants. A lot of what it has to do for me as a mother is, you know, just the fact that I'm teaching my children all religions. I mean, my daughter went to a Church of Christ preschool where she knows about the Christians things. She also knows about the goddess. Her best friend is Jewish. So she's totally aware of this concept that there's many ways to practice the religion. I mean, for me, it comes down to everything from having a statue of a goddess in my office to, you know, sometimes formally meeting with women and doing rituals. I mean, and I would say on a very loose level, a lot of what women's spirituality, what our rituals are like, are basically women in a circle sharing. There's no hierarchy. There's no one telling us what to do, and it's sort of like whoever wants to take the responsibility to do the ritual sort of gets to be the leader. You find out very quickly that to take that responsibility is a lot of work. I mean, it's not like you don't get to set yourself up as the leader and everybody does it for you, like in a formal church. If you want to have a ritual, you're going to be doing the work. So, you know, once people find that out, it's kind of like, oh, I don't want to be the leader.
Right.
And, you know, that's part of what I had talked to you about, too, is like there really are no leaders. There's really no hierarchy. I mean, and it can come together many different ways.
Expressed then by the needs of the participants in that area, in that group.
For me personally, I mean, I was raised Catholic in a very traditional religion. When I became aware of the goddess, it was just very empowering for me. I mean, it suddenly was like, God could be a woman? And it just empowered me so much. It has given me strength in my daily life. That's what I would say. Just feeling like to have this vision of, instead of this mean, nasty God who's going to send you to hell for one transgression, to have this vision of the divine as this wonderful, loving mother. Mothers love their kids no matter what they do. You know, if you talk to a man on death row, I can pretty much guarantee you his mom still loves him. And that's just a whole different concept to view the divine, and that gives you strength, that makes you feel loved, that makes you feel good about yourself.
Mm-hmm. And what about for you, Mara? Your experience may be similar, it may be different. How has women's spirituality translated itself into your daily life?
Well, because part of what I've been doing is studying what else has been known about, for example, tarot and associations of colors to various aspects. It's a new level of awareness. I mean, when we were doing rune work, you drive down the road and you start seeing runes everywhere. When you're doing the tarot, the Kabbalah, you start noticing color associations. And, you know, why are certain signs certain colors? They seem to fit in. Like hospital signs are green, aren't they? And that's the heart, you know. So it's like there were associations everywhere. It's also a more calming kind of effect. In a lot of ways, so I think it's very similar to what we experienced as Christian children, the saying prayers, going to services, except that there's not a high priest or anything. It's whoever has volunteered to take care of that presentation.
And are there many women, in as much as anyone might be a formal participant in women's spirituality, are there many women in the Central Texas area who are involved in different expressions?
Yeah, there are, at some of the events that I've been, some of the larger ones, 125 participants, and there are others who weren't able to come, so we know that there's more of us out there. And it keeps growing. I mean, there's more groups around Central Texas than there used to be. And I know on the internet too that when I first got online about 1.5 years ago, there was a few little smatterings, but now there are lots and lots of goddess women's sites. It's amazing how much more is out there.
And how much more we hear probably too.
Yeah.
And Bridget, you had wanted to say a little something about a conference, was it, that's coming up?
We have every year in September, the weekend of the equinox, we have what's called the Festival of the Goddess out at Stonehaven Ranch. The number that, I don't know if they've already put it on the screen, is a message number. And it's not, you can find out information about the Festival of the Goddess, but it also has, it's what's called the Goddess Hotline, and any sort of goddess, women's spirituality events are on that number, and we've had that number now for a couple of years, and it's always changing. We're always updating it. The Festival of the Goddess is basically a big camp out where women come together. There's no experts, and it's sort of like you come together and share. We post a big bulletin board, and you know, we have set times for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but other than that, it's pretty much you post a sign and say, I want to teach women about this, or I want to, you know, have a chanting circle, or, I mean, like one year my brother died, I did a grief workshop, and we just sort of sat in a circle and talked about things, you know, and it's sort of like what happens is you'll post something you're interested in, and you'll find out there's 10 other women there who want to be there too, and you know, so it's a really sharing thing. There's usually about 150 women there, and it's really wonderful. We're out on a private ranch, Stonehaven Ranch. There's a swimming pool, there's a hot tub. Saturday nights we have a what we call the talent show, which is really interesting. People just get up, and it's amazing the talent pool that we have.
Some of the stuff.
So it's really fun. It's really it's very inviting. We've had women just show up out of the blue who didn't know anybody and just have a great time. I've you know, I know women. We have a friend from Michigan who just got a flyer from a friend in Michigan. She lived in Houston, knew nobody here, and now it's like, you know, some of her we've become best friends from meeting her through the festival.
That's good promotion for that event. We've talked so far about women, but my understanding is that at least somewhere within the women's spirituality movement, there are events that men come to. There are practices that are open also to men. Is that correct?
Well, the Reformed Congregation of the Goddess circle that I'm involved with is women only at this time. I know that there are other events in the Central Texas area that have men in them. For example, Starhawks Reclaiming Collective meets here in Austin. They have a week-long camp out where they work together on a variety of similar subjects. But I like the women energy.
It is nice to have a place to collect that energy and feel that energy.
A lot of the women have found the negative male energies, that they've encountered too much of it and really are so off-put by male energy at all that they don't trust even the good guys.
But
right now.
women's spirituality, I believe, is not a retreat from the world of men and women, but perhaps simply a place to reevaluate, then to go out again?
I think it's a combination. There are many women who like it because it is women only. The ones who don't are probably off with the Reclaiming Collective instead. And that's not the only group. I'm sure that there are others out there. It's just the ones I'm familiar with. I know that the men also come to the Women's Spirit conferences. That's where I first found out about any of this stuff, was at one of the Women's Spirit conferences. And I know there's another one coming up in the spring.
So those are occasional events where people to gather?
She had annual ones at first, and then she was called to do 4, what was it, birth, death, goddess, birth, death, and creativity were the first 4, and then she did one on shamanism, and the next one's on divination. But since it's basically one woman with a bunch of other volunteers getting the whole thing organized, and she wants to do a lot of other things too. She's really active. So she put it off, and it's going to be in the spring instead of in the fall. She's the woman who runs Women's Spirit is also involved with the Stonehaven Goddess program, so she's really active.
So actually the best place to find information about women's spirituality, again, is to call the hotline, right? Leave a message or try to get in contact with someone.
And the other thing about the hotline is if you have information you want to put on there, call us. Leave us a message on the hotline, because we'll be more than happy to put other people's information on there. I mean, it's not just it's a very loose-based group, and anybody who has information, call the hotline. We'll get back with you, give us the information. We'll put your info on there too.
Thanks. And I hope we have a chance at some future point to talk again about what all falls under the women's spirituality movement, to explore some more. So, Mara, thanks so much for coming, and you, Bridget, too. It's been a good conversation here. And we thank those of you who tuned in today for being with us to stretch our minds a little bit here on Austin Faith Dialogue.